Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, world. You're listening to Open Money on Blog Talk Radio. I'm Ernie Yacub on the northwest coast of Turtle Island. Michael Linton is the designer-developer of LET systems, the most widely used community currency in the world, and he's close by in the neighborhood. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Ernie.
Colin Stark is the Vice President of Canadians for Direct Democracy, and he's in Vancouver. Hello, Colin.
Hello, Ernie and Michael.
Hello, Colin.
So today we're going to talk about money and democracy, and you guys are the experts. So why don't we start with you, Colin, and why don't you tell us what democracy means? I mean, we need to define our terms, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. And I want to make it clear that we're not talking of the politician's definition of democracy. We're talking here of direct democracy, which is the closest, the system in Switzerland that's been operating there for 140 years is probably the closest practical example of what exists under the name of democracy on this planet. And we define it as direct democracy, the right of citizens to hold referenda on any issue. So that's a right, not a privilege. And to hold a referendum, not a plebiscite, or even worse, a poll. And it's the right of citizens to hold it on any issue. So it's not that the government can say, oh, we're going to have a referendum on the Olympics. We want your support, so we'll do a dog and pony show and have everybody vote for the Olympics. No. In Switzerland, 4 times a year, the citizens have the right to take any issue that a sufficient number of them want to sign up for and have a vote of the whole country or the canton or the district in which they live, and that vote is binding. It's a referendum. It's binding on the government, and they can overturn anything that the government is putting through. They can overturn it by a majority vote, a simple majority of 50% plus 1. So there's much more to it than that, but that's the simple definition.
Well, it sounds delightful and wonderful, and we'll talk about why there's such resistance to it. Well, perhaps we might talk about what money has to do with it, which is your department, Michael. Money, community currencies, LET systems.
Well, I would echo very strongly Colin's ideas expressed about the rights of the individual. What can people do? What are they entitled to do? Now, whereas for a referendum, it's required that the government pays attention to the right of those of the individuals to do this. With money, we're in a different place. We can create forms of monetary network, which are a form of voting, a form of setting the world the way you want it to go. You're applying your efforts to this rather than that. When you spend it on that rather than this, or whatever. The way we spend our money matters. So, if we can create community monies become at various levels different forms of voting system. Now, it's not
so you vote,
a mandate.
You vote with your money.
That's the basic point, and more deeply than I think people have generally realized. It's not like you're just betting on something, putting your money on this horse or something. It's that the world derives from the actions that we set in motion and the consequences and so much of that is driven by money and presently by a monopoly money. And the opportunity is
hang on for a sec. What do you mean by a monopoly money?
I mean a money that's monopolized by the nation state, the banking system. The conventional financial institutions have given us singular legal tender in almost all modern nation states. And that money has to be a monopoly in those countries, otherwise, well, if everybody was producing that sort of money, it would soon become totally worthless. So They're dedicated to singularity and control, as indeed are most governments in all respects. And
which is of course anti-democratic, right, Colin?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I mean, I don't want to get too deep too quickly, but as soon as someone says democratic in this world, you have to wonder, what do they mean by democratic? Because most people have been indoctrinated to think that we live in a democratic society. And you hear people saying that all the time, and nobody challenges.
Well, but
you're
challenging it.
Oh, absolutely. The other worst one is when someone says, well, our government is accountable to the people. Like, bullshit, if I'm permitted to say that on Blog Talk Radio. As soon as you hear the word democracy or accountability, you know that you're hearing lies. I hate to sound like a radical.
Oh, go ahead. That's fine. You just go right ahead and be a radical, and I'll be the moderate here. So, Michael, what's money got to do with democracy? I mean, what's money got to do with the problem of democracy?
Well, there's the current problem that democracy is a scam name provided to a bun fight where the winner takes all and the powerful are the people with control of the money. Basically, the corporates and the vested interests run the money. I remember at a conference in the States once on reforming election funding, and their slogan was "Get money out of politics." And my comment on the stage was that I thought most people went into politics to get money out of it. That was a wry sense of humor that was not greatly appreciated. But it's a game. It's who's in charge here. Manages the zoning laws or the tax regime or just the government grant systems. And it seems that people with money stay with money. Hence, the U.S. government sold itself to a low tax regime. Highest tax bracket in the States used to be 73%, but then under the spell of Reaganomics, the Milton Friedman stuff and all that excitement, they dropped the top tax bracket down into the 20s, where it still is, I believe, 28 or 32 or something like that. Well, this is just the rich get richer, and boy, do they like it. So they fund the political parties, so the political parties control the media, so the media brings in the vote. So we can either call it, it's certainly not democracy at the moment, and it's very clear that the competitive commodity money is a driving influence in the persistence of that style of pseudo-democracy. So
Would
that's
you agree with that, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Ernie. And we can, I'm sure we'll get very, very deeply into this, both from the money aspect and from the democracy aspect. But before we do so, I want to just make it clear, and I'm going to quote from a guy called Plato. I'm actually
I've
looking
heard of him.
Yeah, he's been around for a while.
Plato.
Plato. He used to play for the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah, that one. I'm reading from page 16 of the translation of Plato's Republic, and I'm not purporting to be a Greek scholar, but what the point I'm making is that this so-called democracy it's right in our language. It's basic to our education system. And here, 2,000 years ago, here's Plato speaking of democracy. He says he's sparring with Socrates, and he says, by saying that right with a capital R is, quote, interest of the stronger, and he explains this to mean that the ruling class in any state will forcibly exact a certain type of behavior from its subjects to suit its own interests. Morality is nothing more or less than the code of behavior so exacted. Now, he goes on to spend a whole chapter and a whole book on this, but I mean, I think we have to understand that what we have been taught since childhood to understand as morality is, in fact, a certain kind of behavior, including adherence to the money system, including adherence to the policeman, including adherence to the views of the Prime Minister. That is what we believe as human beings. We have been brought up to believe that that is morality, that is ethics, if you like. So it's so deeply rooted that it makes it difficult for any of us to understand what a totally free design of, say, a money system or a governance system that is democratic. We really don't know what it means.
Well,
yes,
money trumps morality, I would say. What do you think, Michael?
Well, yeah, in money versus morality, I'll bet on the money anytime. You know, it's not even by a short head. Win by a length. Yeah, the power systems tend to create systems to protect power systems. And money as the major mechanism of our socio-economic commercial world is the big prize. People who control the money seem to control the government, and people who control the government seem to control the money. And 90% of us are outside the core of the game, and too many of us are trying to get into it. That's part of the difficulty, is 80% of the society seem to be desperately anxious to get to the party rather than looking after the home. It's not about economy, it's about excitement and winning. And that applies to politics. Mm-hmm. So I think unless there's some shift in the monetary frame, there won't be much hope for the democratic, the real democratic. The corridors of power are currently occupied, and nobody's willing to leave.
Well, let's talk about shifting the money frame, as you put it. What you're talking about is what this show is about, and that's open money. So perhaps you can give us a little intro to open money.
Well, the basis of conventional money is that it's their stuff, and it comes from the banks and the central government and whatever, and that's the stuff we pass around. Now, as soon as you come up with a situation where I don't have any money to do a trade with you because I'm flat broke, is that when the world stops? I have no money, I cannot act, because I may have plenty of time, I may have plenty of skills. So how about I use your product? You sell me the loaf of bread or the barrel of beer, and I give you an undertaking that my time will be at your service or somebody else's at some time in the future. Now, particularly if the undertaking I offer you, the IOU some time, is understood to be transferable, so that if you actually want what Colin is offering, you can spend the money with him, because it is money. My promise to provide my time can be seen as a very simple and clear-cut form of monetary instrument. It's my promise, and it's now something that you use to get something from Colin, so that maybe Colin can get something from me. Now, that's nothing more than I've said, gee, I would love to pay you, Ernie, but I can't. I don't have any cash. Here's a promise of my time. You use that promise with Colin. Colin uses it with me. We're all happy. Now, we didn't have to ask anybody's permission to engage in that process of negotiating the gift of our services and times and the reconciliation of that amongst us. And that's what open money is. Open money is just making the statement of, come on, guys, wake up. Money is what you say it is, and we can form little networks, big networks, cross-regional networks. We can use this method of not keeping score, because that's all it is. We're just tracking what we think things were worth and who gave them to what and wherever. It's a form of
well, we'll get into the details of that a little bit later. I want to bring Colin back in. Colin, you know a little bit about this stuff. Did that make sense to you, what Michael just expounded on?
Yes, absolutely. And to be devil's advocate to a small extent, let me just say that while I've known Michael for probably over 20 years and known of his strange theories for more than 20 years, and I understand them up to a point. I've never lived in an open money society, and in the back of my head, I'm still hearing little voices saying, yeah, that's all right, but money doesn't grow on trees. You've got to work for your money, and, you'll never get anywhere without working, and, you're a lazy bum, and what do you mean you should have a fair share? All of that stuff. And I think that's what Plato was getting at when he said that the rulers set up a system, and they call it ethics or morality, and we believe it, and we don't have any other language other than these little voices that go around in our heads. So,
good point.
Yeah,
good point.
And
language is very important.
That's what Orwell said. In 1984, the control of words was what the Ministry of Information was all about. Good plus good, ungood. Those were the words. Let's make things too complicated. So this is it. Languaging is a huge component of, well, one might nowadays in modern language talk about branding. How is a thing seen in the world? Well, it's often seen by the labels that have been attached to it and the associations people have accumulated around those labels. And around democracy, around money, about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, everybody's got opinions. Very deep, very personal, generally totally unexamined. And that's the way the power system would be quite happy to leave it. I mean, George Bush talks about democracy as though he means it. But, my God, what does he mean?
Well, yeah, that reminds me of Lenny Cohen's song, Democracy is Coming to the USA. Brilliant, brilliant song.
Yeah. So we've got to get the words to move. We've got to reclaim language in our conversation, in our rhetoric, in our writing, to encourage others to think beyond the boxes that they've been carefully and easily herded into. Well,
and one of the things that you've been working on, and what you have been working on, is redefining the word money.
Reclaiming it, yes. For instance, there's a lot of talk about, there's real money, and then there are these complementary social currencies, as though they were a little addition on the side, a little, tail fins on your Chevy or something like that. And the point and you as well, Ernie, we've been making for 10 years now, is that the origin of money is in the social act, not in the digging of a bag of gold out of some mountain somewhere, or in the declaration of a legal tender monopoly by a central authority. The bigger description of money is it's the promise we use to negotiate our gifts. And within that, conventional money is a subset, a degenerate aberration in the evolution of an intelligent social system. I think Plato would have gone for multi-currency open money if he had a Palm Pilot or a BlackBerry or something. He'd be right in there. But
you don't think it would work with stone tablets?
More difficult. It takes a lot of time. You've got to, mind you,
got to carve the stone. I mean, first of all, you got to dig out the stone, then you got to carve it, then you got to haul it around. I mean, that's difficult.
Yeah. So the technology is a lot easier than it was. But the principle remains. If you use your words with quality, if you say you're going to do something and then do it, and that becomes known, then that is a productive way of making your resources available to others who make their resources available to you in kind, in commonwealth. So I see open money as the set within which conventional money is a very small and hopefully diminishing subset, a crazy cancerous growth that really has nothing to do with with matching social world and the economic world to the physical and the personal.
Okay, so you see these little, you say small and large networks that use community currencies as a means of exchange. You see that as scalable. Most people think of these things, as you say, social currency, a barter system. Ithaca hours is an example of the kind of community currency that people look at and see, oh, isn't that nice? We should have one with pretty pictures on our bills too, like Salt Spring Dollars, where they have artists create this beautiful money. Have you ever seen a Salt Spring Dollar, Colin?
No, but I've heard it described, and as Michael was talking there, I was beginning to grasp what he meant by open money as something very basic, very comprehensive, in its essence, very simple. And the other part of me, the devil's advocate part, was remembering that just yesterday I spoke at a public meeting, just as someone from the audience speaking into the space created by a politician. And I spoke of open money and democracy, and it immediately got translated into cooperatives. And from there to Mondragon, the Spanish cooperative that has been so successful, and to Vancity, the cooperative in Vancouver that is in effect a bank. And I think that's about as far as most people can comprehend democracy and money, or open money.
Yeah, they tend to think of, it's like in the Cowboys and Indians, with the white hats, bad hats, black hats, good guys, bad guys, as soon as you say something that's got a social or a broader thing, oh yes, like the co-ops, like Mondragon, and that's the only box they can put it into. It's still a fight, but you're fighting that way. That's the best they got for it. What was the meeting there, Colin? What was the gist of the world?
The person speaking was actually speaking to the role of the corporation in modern society, and pointing out the theme of his talk was that corporations have gained power over the past 100 years, and that they are now threefold. They are legal entities, same as a human being. Their liability is limited. And the third thing was the major point, that they now have, by United States law and confirmed by the Supreme Court some years ago, they now have an actual legal obligation to maximize their profits. And any other obligation they have to shareholders, customers, or anything else is secondary to their legal obligation to shareholders to maximize their profits. So into that, it's a very sympathetic topic to me, but when I tried to point out that that was a very small part of democracy and money, and we got into the Mondragon and the cooperative Vancity thing, the speaker, to his credit, he ran away into Ithaca currencies and said, yes, I know about that, and and he ran off into the Ithaca money type play. Now, he was being as genuinely knowledgeable as he possibly could be, and he's a very knowledgeable person. I don't want to name him.
Who is this knowledgeable person?
I'm sorry?
You don't want to name him, did you say?
Well, I'd rather not, because he genuinely is a politician who understands more than most politicians about these things.
Well, he might want a plug. If he's a politician, he's obviously going to want a plug.
Well, if we can give him a plug by having him on the show sometime. For the moment,
only if we know his name.
Remain as,
I know his name. I think that's an oxymoron, anonymous politician.
Well, he's just a young fellow.
A young fella, right? Okay.
A fresh moron, not a fully developed one.
So, in this talk about corporations maximizing profits, was the word money used?
I think profit was the word that was used rather than
money. Was the word money used?
Probably, but I don't really know.
Yeah.
And most people don't distinguish between money, profit, gross margin. I could get into all sorts of technical accounting terms as to what profit is or what money is, but it's all gobbledygook.
Yes, it's about accumulating power, assets, control. That's really the corporate structure. Is this amazing redefinition of how people can come together and be both responsible and irresponsible. And this judgment you just cited, Colin, that the shareholder profit is the highest value and must be respected before all else in the due
except for the
performance.
CEO's profits, money.
Well, no, he's got to. He all sits inside the shareholders, and the argument is if the CEO is making a pile, then so the shareholders are too, because everybody's happy at the rapacious behavior of this irresponsible bunch of money-grubbing bastards.
And that's what we come down to. It's all about the money.
It's all about the fight. It's all about the competition. And competitions and fights are created by the lack of better alternatives, the lack of negotiated collaborations and comfortable relationships and win-win frameworks. Conventional money, conventional politics, conventional warfare has always been win-lose stuff, and boy, it's staying that way. And we've got to evolve a different strata to society. And I don't want to talk elitism here. I'm not saying this is only for the good guys. I'm saying who wants to play this game? They're playing with guns and knives on this side of the room. Who wants to come over here and play with
teddy bears?
Teddy bears.
Cuddly toys. Anyway, we're about halfway through the program. We've got 33 minutes remaining. I thought maybe I should let people know that they're listening to Open Money on Blog Talk Radio. My name's Ernie Yacub. I'm talking with Michael Linton and Colin Stark. We're talking about money and democracy, and we're going to take the time remaining, the next half hour, to go a little deeper into the soft money. That's for you, Michael, soft money.
Deeper into the soft stuff. Well, I think in relation to this general concept of democracy, which I think it would be useful for Colin to remind us. Give us the soundbite, the meme to end all memes about democracy, Colin.
Direct democracy.
Take it away.
Direct democracy is the right of citizens to hold a referenda on any issue.
Binding referenda, right?
By definition, a referendum is binding.
Okay.
A plebiscite is non-binding.
I see.
The language has been shifted in the past 50 years.
Again, the language problem.
Yeah.
Actually, before you go on here, Michael, I thought maybe I should let people know that there is a chat line that goes with this program, and people can send us a note, let us know if you're out there listening, or a question, or you want in on the conversation. Drop us a note on the chat line at BlogTalkRadio/Open If you want to know more about community currencies, open money, mutual credit systems, let systems, first place to go is lets.net. And these URLs are up on the chat line as well. Openmoney.org, openmoneyeditme.com, that's openmoney.editme.com, and openmoney.info.
All of which will
and the Direct Democracy website.
Oh, darn, the Direct Democracy website. I didn't even put it there. Well, we got 3 people. We got Jester leaving. Did you see this? Jester joined the room. Guest joined the room. Jester left the room. That's on our chat, by the way.
Yeah, I may be the guest.
Can you give us that URL again, Colin?
It's www.npsnet.com, npsnet.com/CDD, which is short for Canadians for Direct Democracy.
And they can Google CDD as well.
And you can Google Canadians for Direct Democracy, yes.
Yeah. So that's npsnet.com/CDD.
Right.
Okay, over to you, Michael. Soft money. And I think perhaps even going right down to the very basic idea of a LET system where every account starts at 0, you go negative, you go positive. I think that would be useful to briefly talk about.
Well, it's interesting because it was derived rather democratically. We'd run into the situation in Knox Valley where there was no appreciable amount of money around, and whole hordes of us were looking for ways to negotiate the wherewithals of, bread on the table, roof on the house, and how do we do this? And we realized we had to create our own neighborhood money, our community money. And then we had long discussions about how much we should create. We realized pretty quickly it was sensible to measure everything in dollars because everybody already did, and it would make accounting and pricing very clear to people. It's just a different measuring tape. The measure is the same. An inch is an inch, a dollar is a dollar. But we had to have our own measures, so let's have the Comox Valley dollar. Now, the first problem we came up with was how much of it should we make? Because we realized it's just paper. Okay, how much paper should we print and give ourselves to begin with? That was the big question. And we realized very quickly that $1,000 was too much for our confidence in the idea. People said, well, listen, just a minute, if there's 20 of us and we all have $1,000, that's 20,000. Well, I bet somebody pretty soon will end up with 15 of those. And the rest of us will be short of the money again. So what do we do? Or will the guy with 15 believe he can get value out of it? Or will he panic and just dump it? Will there be a run on the money? There were so many questions people had about how stable is this total fictional game we set up. There wasn't much confidence. And we thought, okay, well, let's reduce it. Let's give each other $100 to begin with. And the answer to that was, well, what can you do with $100? It's nothing. Our economies at the moment run on, something like $50,000 per person in Canada, something like that. So here we were thinking that $100 would be a good number for the Comox Valley's currency. Didn't seem sensible. And then we finally realized that the truth of the matter was we had no money. We had no way to support or underwrite or put aside gold bars in the back room to substantiate this money or anything like it. We had none. That was the truth. There is no money. So if we started all in our network at 0, that was the truth. And then the person who goes negative, like in an overdraft, they've spent money, they've gone negative, the other person goes positive. That's how it looks. I go up, you go down, sort of thing, all across the network. The people who go negative have created money. They have said, my position in the network at minus $500 means that $500 of my time or goods will be available to other people who show up and want to buy them. So we make promises, and those are an extraordinary act of personal sovereignty and democracy and accountability. In fact, it creates a little self-managing community that doesn't have to have a hierarchy of control. It simply has to have a degree of self-awareness. And in most smallish communities, people know what's going on. People know who they feel good about, whose business is reliable, whose business is a little flaky, but he's a nice guy anyway, so we'll give him a bit of rope but not too much. And it's through those informal negotiations and personal relationships and experiences that the democracy of the local money system is self-defined. Now, it was quite curious that as soon as we put these things out and started talking about them, people wanted to form non-profit societies, form elections of the officers so that it could be democratic. And, of course, it became
and go after grant money. Don't forget the grant money.
Oh, well, those are all parts of it. But it came down to the systems became things that people wanted to control for a variety of reasons. They thought it would work better if it was better controlled, or there was a board of review, or there were credit limits, or there were reliable officers in the organization or something. They had all the ideas about this will work better if. And so they implemented the instrument that they thought was democratic, which is one person, one vote once a year, and then we have a committee. And of course, it's everything but democratic. It just carries the label and gives people the sort of the sense of political correctness, or we're doing the right thing. You can't point your fingers at us and say we're radical. We're really nice people. And every piece of so-called democracy that was inflicted upon the LET systems was extremely counterproductive. Death by committee.
Death by committee.
Now, for
Colin, death by committee, and I mean, what Michael has to say about LET systems starting up all over the place with these committees and boards of directors, which everybody would say, well, that's the democratic way. Do you agree with Michael's analysis?
Well, I find it rather strange, frankly, Ernie. On the one hand, I've been through enough coercive organizations, typically in huge multinational corporations that I've worked for, and so-called democratic organizations, non-profits, etc., even churches, God forbid. And, I mean, what Michael says in practice, that is what happens. Now, is that because at basis, and I'm getting my feet into philosophy that I know nothing about at this point, but is that because we mistake, authority for truth, where we should really be recognizing that truth is authority? Or is it because individual people are psychologically incapable of not exercising control over their neighbor, that as soon as three people get together, one has to be the boss and the other two have to be subservient? I think we're getting into some pretty deep philosophical, psychological ground here.
I would say it's a common social construct that if there's something that has a quality of value to it, a good thing, a good place, a good cow, a good game, a good business idea, then there's a tendency for all sorts of people to worry about losing it. It's always the loss. It's not often, I want to win at this and be in charge. There was very little venality, for instance, in the LET system stuff, a bit around the grant applications business, We'll do it our way and we'll do it in secret and we'll call it democratic and so on. But more typically, all that was happening in these Mothers Institute type LET systems was that people feared its apparent lack of structure and control. It was like they were being given a bicycle and they wanted tricycles or four-wheel vehicles. They didn't trust anything with less than four wheels. So as soon as you give them a bicycle, they strap two of them together and, that's it. And now we're safe. It's just a knee-jerk reaction to, if it's a good thing, we'd better have control of it.
Well, and if it's a collective thing, than if it's a collective thing, there's a network, there's a group of people, like the first LET system in the Comox Valley. There are people all over the valley who get accounts in the LET system that start at zero, and they start trading. They start buying things from each other. If you hadn't been there, the way they would approach that would have been to have formed, first of all, to form the committee, and then the nonprofit incorporated structure that
the annual elections. There would have been annual elections.
Yeah, and all of those things, and this is what happened to a lot of the LET systems that were started as a result of the one that you created here in the Comox Valley. They started all over the world.
Yeah, it was just generally understood. You can't do that. You can't have a free form of self-organizing social behavior. That's not right and proper. It's a void.
Well, you can you?
Yes, you can. Obviously, evidently, we've found that to be absolutely so. You provide a system of relationships, a set of agreements, and a facility for enabling those to happen, and nobody needs to organize it, manage it, or control it at all. Generally, because
God, that raises the specter of bloodless technocrats and nerds running a computer-based monster that gets out of control and destroys the whole world. Hey, I'm scared.
Yeah, I bet
no need to be scared, Colin. Actually, it's only people of our generation that would be scared. The people that are on Facebook and MySpace and Google and Yahoo and all that, they've got all kinds of these networks going that
like
don't
eBay,
have any hierarchical structures to them at all.
Well, I mean, that may be, and I understand what you're saying, Ernie. And at one level, I'm really just trying to point out as consciously as I can that, and I'm taking the part of the fearful human being that is out there somewhere. I mean, not you, me, or Michael. That is still a child with a reptilian brain, And let me give you an example.
Reptilian brain, did you say?
A reptilian brain, yes. Let me give you an example of, as you know, Ernie and Michael too, about 25 years ago, I guess, there was a book published called Love is Letting Go of Fear. It's still a current title, and you can still pick it up, and it's still very, very true. Now, it was the first of probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of books published about a philosophy which I've actually been studying quite deeply in the past 18 months. And fear is so deeply rooted within us that there are only two emotions according to this philosophy, love and fear. And in my involvement in the past 18 months with very advanced practitioners of this philosophy, it's very difficult, even for the most advanced of them, to do the most simple transaction, like cut a carrot into two pieces. That simple, without encountering fear.
Fear of the carrot. Be very afraid. Yeah, I know. I do accept this. I think it's the nature of the psyche that it operates at the edges of its own comfort. It doesn't notice things until it notices it's threatened at some level. So the desire versus aversion dimension, the love-fear, is always a dimension that people are susceptible to. And we do have to address what people's fears are. That's absolutely critical. But not everybody's. We don't have to try and develop a communication about this that will reach everybody in the Lower East Side or everybody in Alberta or whatever. You actually only have to find that very, very small strand of people, that thread of interest and excitement that comes with people who are less afraid. If they're afraid of anything, it's being too late. They want to be there first. They want to see the new ideas. They're willing to check things and see what they're like. And if we can pick up some interactions with, one person in 40, about 2%, 3% of the community will respond to different ideas than the ones that they've been fed for the last 40 years of their lives. So the fear thing is there, but we can go. I think
it's also in the practice. I think it's also in the doing. And as soon as there is a robust community currency system, open money system in one place, people will begin to do it all over. They'll be like mushrooms.
Yeah, it's like the first one will create more reality for others. It's a lot like bicycles.
And more comfort. It's more comfort. And
I don't know. If you think about bicycles,
seeing is believing.
Seeing is believing. If you've never seen a bicycle and somebody sends you the parts in a box and says, put this together, here are the instructions, now get on and ride it, the first reaction has got to be, you're crazy, that's nuts, it's not going to work. And so typically people would put a third wheel on it, or they would secure the steering, because obviously the steering would make it inaccurate. So what they do instead is they fix the steering so that it can only go in a straight line. In fact, it might be nice to have it in tram lanes or something. So the original concepts of the bicycle could get very easily and logically reorganized by a fearful society into something else. But when you've seen half a dozen kids pedaling around the street on bikes, you're 4 years old, and you know everybody who's more than 4 years old rides a bike. You don't have the slightest doubt in the institution. You have fear that you're going to fall off it, but you don't fear that the bicycle will not work. And there will come a time when people will see community currencies like bicycles. It's got two wheels. It moves. That's it.
Ernie?
Yes, Colin.
Yeah, let me jump in again on both sides, as I seem to be testing myself into that role.
Watch the fence as you go. Watch where the fence ends up.
Careful.
I took